but it's such a useful crutch on a cold Tuesday afternoon when you're running out of ideas, when you want to put a new spin on a lesson, to have that aid. And so getting it to go, right, I'm going to generate a source using AI for my students. And I managed to generate something, I'll tell you about it later, but it engaged them. And I was like, wow, I've got them. And then I realized the value and the ease. And that's really what I wanted to pass on to everyone else. But I have Winnie to thank for it.
Yeah, Roddy, I love that. And Dan, I'll come to you in a second. I remember being at a dinner party many months ago now, actually. You mentioned I was working in AI. And of course, the question came in from I think it was a professor or something, is, well, I guess you're very concerned about killer robots then, aren't you, Richard, if you work in the space? I was like, that is not my number one concern. But he was being totally serious. Dan, what was your aha moment?
I suppose maybe not so much an aha moment, but I suppose the immediacy of AI and almost the fact that this kind of I suppose this very new technology has been very new to everybody almost all at the same time. And I think there's many technologies where, especially in the education sector, we kind of lag behind industry, if you will, but sometimes by a number of, quite a few years. Whereas, AI, everybody kind of come at it from the same sort of starting point and kind of gone into different directions. And I found that, for me, I think is one of the most exciting aspects around AI. And I think in terms of aha moments, if you will, some of the stuff that we've seen that we've not expected to see. So where we've used Winnie to begin to interrogate data, and it's picked out and analysed trends in data that we otherwise wouldn't have spotted as humans, if you will. That kind of stuff has been, almost like just sort of scratching the surface of the kind of full potential of AI as we kind of move forward, really.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another example I had was an event I got introduced as a world expert in AI who knows everything about AI. So, of course, the first thing I had to say was, no, that is simply not true. And if anyone does claim that, leave.
Exactly. You know that's a fallacy. I mean, we very much approach this with, there are no experts. I remember I said it in the first briefing launching Winnie to stuff, is there aren't any experts. Those that there are monetizing this in Silicon Valley. And so, and they're not interested in helping a small FE college near Windsor try and get ahead of the curve. So actually, we've had to try and upskill and tool ourselves to understand how to use it. And that's why there's been such a great burst of collaboration and cross-industry connections and meetings and talks, and why we've talked about Winnie so much, to try and enthuse people about it, because we're tech evangelists, but not everyone is, and yet this can bring such a positive culture change in institutions where it enables a positivity around technology, so that rather than the conversation being, have you tried turning it off and back on again, and slamming your mouse on the desk, suddenly you've got something that's useful and can save time. And those wow moments, you only need one, and it's so straightforward and simple to achieve. I mean, I had the head of structural technologies at the college group wanted to send out a student voice, and they have half-hour lunchtime meetings. People are eating their lunch. They've got a lot to cover in that time. And inevitably, over a few weeks, they hadn't got round to writing or drafting the questions. And I said, well, look, come on, let's give it to Winnie and see what we get. And straight away, 10 questions, 7 or 8 of which we probably could have predicted and written ourselves if we'd had the time. But it got us going. And then there were 2 questions there that I don't think would have occurred to us. But it meant that immediately that whole department went, oh, this is great. And you just need that engagement, that hook to get people going. And look, I mean, last time the 3 of us spoke, it was getting dark by the time we finished because we get so excited about all of this. But I think there's so many little tiny instances of positive change. And so I'm an enthusiast. I'm an optimist.
An example from this morning, actually, where it helped me with a really boring task, but it helped so quickly that it was really amazing. We essentially got a big asset register of all of our staff laptops across the college group, and we kind of going through that exercise. Which of these devices are eligible for the Windows 11 upgrade? Which ones need replacing over the next few years? And instantly. Just by having access to that spreadsheet, Winnie analysed that data, come back and said, 67% of these devices are eligible for Windows 11 upgrades, X amount of these devices are over 5 years old. A task that would otherwise, take hours and hours was just achieved really, really quickly. And I think that's, sorry, we'll just be stuck on that one question there now. But that sort of stuff has been a massive time saver for us.
And Firefly, I'm a big fan of image generation, and actually Google Image FX is great as well. And Winnie can generate images now for us. I think I've spent quite a lot of time trying to upscale the quality of imagery in presentations, because for me, pedagogically, the best way to engage students is to prove you care. And I'm sure we can come back to that when talking about using it to mark or just generate and take away the teacher ownership over that, which I disagree with. But it's about demonstrating you care. And if you've got a scuzzy, low-res image that you've grabbed off Google Images and it's really pixelated, it looks a bit slapdash. And I think the fact that you can get a custom image that suits the lesson, that validates and backs up that learning point, is great. Sorry, I'm just thinking about a gazillion different ways in which I've been hooked.
Dan, just to you for a moment, do you worry that one day in the not so distant future, you're actually finding it quite hard to relate to people who haven't started their AI journey at all, that you've just come so far that you're starting to lose connection with those that haven't tried it or used it at all?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, we were just talking, Roddy and I were talking this morning, and we don't feel we've gone far enough in some areas. There's so much more we can do. And you can almost kind of see how the future is going to play out now in terms of being a more efficient business, more efficient organization, more efficient industry, I suppose. I suppose yes, potentially. One of the things that we've been very fortunate over the last sort of year or so to be, I've spoke to a number of schools, colleges, universities around projects that we're doing, projects that they're doing, and we've always said, the best thing an organization could do is just press go and just start using AI in some capacity. And I think ultimately, you will, I suppose, from a business perspective, specifically, be very left. You will fall behind, I suppose, in terms of not just the technology that you use, but your output. Because the expectations around what we can achieve in specific timeframes, increases with our use of AI, and that gap will just get exponentially bigger, I suppose.
We do still come across colleges and universities who have been slightly reticent, or who have spent quite a lot of time, understandably, being cautious and planning policies and strategy and coming up with a lot of sort of nuts and bolts of how to handle privacy and malpractice and plagiarism, which is great. But in many cases, because they've been nervous to jump in and just, come on in, the water's lovely, it only takes that one wow to go, I see. That's what we can do. We need to just start. And it's nervousness, isn't it? Humans are change averse unless they're taken by the hand and shown why. And I think it's been explaining the why that we've been so passionate for advocating in this last year, because FE is incredibly nimble, actually. We've been really fortunate that as a sector, we've been we're small enough but dynamic enough that we can grab the bull by the horns. And so there's been so many instances of excellent practices. I mean, we love our colleges. And whereas universities sometimes, I think, can be larger oil tankers, so it takes them a slightly longer time to angle around and set sail. But even talking to universities, many departments are champing at the bit and are hungry to get started. Sometimes it's just a case of going, it's okay, and saying it's all right to try, you can practice.
Yeah, and I can see why people would be concerned when it comes to data privacy and ethics. And I guess just an unknown. I'll give a slightly strange analogy, but I was watching that old series on Netflix, Years and Years, if anybody remembers that one from 2019, where they predict into the future. And one thing that struck me, and it's the same with things like Black Mirror and even the last Mission Impossible film, is that if you don't have a grasp on technologies, these things can sound really, really scary. And because it feels like there are some very, very clever people out there who can do whatever they want to you anytime with technology, and you won't even understand what they're doing. And that's not true. This stuff's really, really difficult. My neighbor but one told me that there were 5G receivers going into every single lamppost in the country to monitor and track every one of us. So that's quite a task, considering that we can't.
Is it me?
You might have frozen there.
We lost Richard. There was a moment I was like, has my connection dropped out? I think we lost you. We're in Black Mirror. Been hoiked out.
Hopefully.
It reminds me. It reminds me of all of that footage, in films in the 90s, you'd see somebody coding and actually they're just slapping their hands down on the keyboard and you were like, no, they're not. But you can look at that, we can look at that and laugh, and other people are like, no, gosh, look, they're doing something nefarious. Who's that? There's a music video with somebody trying to send a message on a BlackBerry.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Well, that was
He's back.
Yeah, I'm running on the second laptop here to stream, and I could see that one was still online and fine. And I thought, that's unfortunate. So I was just saying, yes.
Yeah,
please.
so Roddy searching for a very important video at the moment, so please.
You were reminding me of Dilemma.
Right.
Kelly Rowland is texting in an Excel spreadsheet, and it's a brilliant image, and you go, what? But if you don't understand, if it's a world that you don't speak, of course you're going to, that's not scary, but if you watch AI doing untold things or becoming a dangerous robot, as you started with, Richard, then of course you'll be scared. But that's why for us, education, that's our business. That's always the first step.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm leading on to a key point here, obviously. But yeah, there's complete nonsense that comes out of these movies. And so, when people talk about rogue AI running the world, I say to them, well, who's paying for that? You've got to understand the logistics here. It costs OpenAI, they estimate, somewhere between $10 and $20 million per year to respond to people that say thank you. Just saying thank you, ChatGPT, and it goes, no problem at all. If I can help at all, let me know. That costs $20 million, right? So, you want to run an AI system that's starting to do its own, that's billions and billions and billions of pounds. So my point being that actually, is there a sense that maybe if we don't grasp the underlying architectural work that's happened here, as in, what is ChatGPT? What are LLMs versus these are magic? Do you think that gap is one that we haven't fully bridged yet in the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that I suppose the key differences between generative AI and machine learning as well. And we kind of talk about sometimes we talk interchangeably about AI as this thing that's going to kind of solve everything, but actually there's very specific tasks in the sector that kind of need to be solved in different ways. And Yes, to your question.
We were saying, even today, I was kicking myself that I haven't finished. I've got a lovely sort of modular introduction for staff that just distills down things I've said in different briefings and in different training sessions so that new starters have access to the same package. And I haven't had a chance to put it together on Classroom yet. I was saying to Dan this morning, I really want to get that up and rolling because I'm excited about it. But so yes, there is always more we can do. But as Dan very kindly pointed out, you can't do everything all at once. You can't eat an elephant all at once. You've got to start somewhere. But definitely, I think it's a really fine line between bamboozling people with too much technical information. There's an extent to which talking about back propagation and neural networks is you're going to lose the audience straight away.
Sorry, Roddy, you lost me a second.
Bless me. But people are thinking, what's he talking about? But if you go into too much detail, you baffle people. And if you don't give enough detail, and of course, as we know, differentiating for all our learners, different staff have different expectations and needs and different levels of detail that they need. So it's a tricky game. It's that getting inside the black box to try and explain AI when education is itself a black box and human brains are a black box that we can't always join the dots. So it's horses for courses, but we have to try and we have to keep the conversation going.
I think just to kind of jump in there as well, this is something that Roddy does so excellent at in terms of how he communicates those concepts to staff. I think that's one of the keys to our success in terms of rolling out AI across the organisation at Windsor Forest has been that ability to kind of communicate those very difficult concepts to staff. And there's this great kind of analogy where, Roddy can do it much more justice than I can, but where he describes this kind of African grey parrot that he sees on holiday. I don't know if you want to kind of mention that one.
I wasn't sure if you were going to make me do an impression of the Wizard of Oz or an African parrot, because I love an analogy to try and explain and relate. But yes, this was an African grey parrot I met on a holiday in Spain. And whenever a Spanish person walked past, it would go, "Buenos dias," and would chat away to them. And whenever an English person walked past, you'd hear it go, "Good morning." And it was, I've always loved the idea of a talking parrot, from Enid Blyton and the River of Adventure and the Kiki the parrot. Wipe your feet, shut the door. I've always wanted to meet a real life talking parrot. So I went to see this bird and it didn't say a word. It just listened on the fence and tiptoed towards me, clawed its way along. And its owner said, it won't speak, it's listening. It's listening to you. And so I've used that as an analogy for training the model, that if you want it to listen and record you so that it can imitate you later, that's fine. But if you're giving it anything sensitive, then you should be more cautious and use Winnie instead, which is why we've been so lucky to direct people internally to a safe place to practice AI.
I think that's key to, not just AI, but to promoting any technology as well. It's just kind of making those concepts accessible to staff and, be able to kind of relate in different ways, give those really fantastic sort of case examples of where, AI has improved our own workloads, if you will. And I think that's kind of really key to adoption.
And trying to meet all of those different starting points. I mean, Richard, you mentioned colleges that perhaps haven't yet begun their AI journey, and talking to them. It's the same with individual staff members. Some know where Winnie is on the intranet. They're there. They've got it open in a tab. It's bookmarked. They're using it every day. And they're not always the early tech adopters either. They're typically not the most IT confident people. It's fascinating to me that, Juliana, one of our excellent pioneers in ESOL, is very proud of the fact she's got a sort of 15-year-old iPhone, but that she was straight in there with AI because she could see her students using it, recognized how easy it was. You can't break it. We're only going to learn by diving in, but everyone's got a different starting point. So there are some who've had ChatGPT on a private license since it dropped, and there are others who aren't familiar with where the link is and are still a little bit nervous of it. So it's trying to meet all of those different needs.
Oh, and you mentioned Winnie, and obviously that's our sort of main talking event today, the thing that people have come to hear more about, of course. So don't worry, we're getting that very soon. But there are clearly three distinct camps, aren't there, in terms of the users of AI in a college, when in fact the first group is those that can't or won't use it or haven't taken that first step. And that's still a pretty significant group in public sector. And then those that are fairly comfortable now with prompting it. Can you do this? Can you write this? Can you summarize that? And then there's those that are sort of flying with it, really, and they're using it as a sort of cognitive brainstorming partner. I imagine that you're pretty keen to get everybody out of that first group where possible and give them some of these great use cases. But how likely or plausible do you think it is to move the second group into the third?
I was poised and ready to talk about the first group then. I was going to say more of an emphasis on the won't nowadays as opposed to the can't. But I might defer to my colleague Roddy on that one.
Yeah, I was thinking on the first group, I'm going to do a politician's answer and I want to answer. On the first group, we had that. I did a survey last June, and something like I think it was 2/3 of our staff had used it, which is above the national average, which according to the National Literacy Council, I think was 48% of staff in the UK 2024 used it. So we got 2/3. That's good, but I was very curious what the other third was saying, and typically speaking, it was that they didn't feel they needed it for their job, or they felt nervous to get started. So firstly, I've got to make sure that they have understood how to use it, and secondly, that there is a sense of why, that it doesn't need to be this massive, wow, I think there's a lot of game-changing speak on LinkedIn and on social media and in the media generally that makes people think that there's a dizzying sense of development, and they're already behind, and that they've missed the bus. And I think it's very important to say, don't worry, get on whenever you like. It's a hop on, hop off service. Just try it. So it's about proving to them why they need it. And then in terms of moving the next group, it's actually part of the same conversation. To move 2 into 3 is about getting people back in and seeing how they can use it in different ways. So if you've so far only used it to rephrase an email into a more formal vernacular, then how about trying getting it to generate some quiz questions for your lesson? How about getting it to fill in a formula in Google Sheets? It's about going, have you thought about this? And that's all of that best practice sharing that our AI Council helps with, and our internal CPD days, but also across the sector. It's the value of events like this and going, I hadn't thought about that, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, I think it's digital leadership. I'm not just kind of talking about myself and Roddy. I think across the organisation, it's that that enthusiasm around the adoption of these tools. I think there's an organizational responsibility to provide a tool set, I think, to staff, to innovate and to do amazing things. But yeah, I think we're incredibly fortunate at Windsor Forest that our CEO Gillian is a huge advocate for technology and a massive Star Trek fan. There's digital leadership. We've got Roddy, and we have Tim, who's our fantastic group head of IT. But then also our curriculum leads, assistant principals, and other key members of staff are sharing examples of where it's improved what they do as well. And I think that's really key. And I think that one of the joys, one of the pleasures of promoting AI across the college group has almost been kind of, in a sense, sort of holding that mirror up and kind of sharing those examples back out across the organization, and saying, so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so's doing that, and be able to kind of, pull through those real world case examples, those human examples of, if you will, of where AI has been incredibly effective.
Yeah, I think so. And it's amazing, isn't it, when you have that spirit, perhaps, that you're referring to in Windsor, and we see that at Harlem, BCOT and others, and Capital City College Group, and it's sort of enthusiasm, it's top down, and like you said, it creates an environment for people to try things, play around with things, lower that fear factor. It's really positive. According to the press, there's something between 50 and 70% of people within a private organization will be using ChatGPT on their own personal account, what's been called shadow AI, because the systems that they have with corporate access aren't good enough or simply aren't there. And they can do so much more in terms of productivity and efficiency by grabbing their own laptop and starting to use it. Of course, it comes with governance and cybersecurity challenges, of course, and sort of lack of control and visibility in the corporation. So to get around that, you do need to give your staff the best policies and, of course, the best technologies. And that's what you set out to do quite early, I would say, not just, we were talking about this before the session, not just for FE, I think early generally across all sectors really, was to say we need to enable all of our staff, teachers, back office, support staff, to be able to access ChatGPT for like tools. But we've got to keep those costs down. So, I mean, if you go out and bought, I don't know, 600 to 1,000 licenses of ChatGPT, $20 to $30 a month, depending on what you needed with Copilot and so on as well. Wow, you're into some big money pretty quickly.
Ouch. Yeah, that's eye-watering.
It certainly is, yeah. So you had the leadership in place. You wanted to start being in control of your own destiny, if you like. So for those who haven't heard the story, let's spend a few minutes on how did this start? How did you envision and then deliver something like Winnie? What is it? And then, as comfortable as you are, let's talk about the technologies underneath it and even actually what it costs you to run such a thing, because that's the things people want to know, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it really kind of, from the beginning, if you will, I was very fortunate in my kind of new role in the college group that Gillian, our CEO, put me in touch with the CIO of a major airline, and I had 3 or 4 meetings with this person, really inspirational, and they shared a great example of where their business, their industry, was saving huge amounts of time on customer service by implementing a kind of a private chatbot. And that chatbot kind of knew all of the airline's policies and procedures. So they were able to kind of cut down their customer service times from response times from about 25 minutes to 5 minutes, which meant the customers were happy because they were getting a quicker response. They were more efficient as a business. And it was kind of win-win, if you will. So we kind of took that concept away. We knew we wanted to kind of do that at Windsor Forest. I suppose the challenge was really kind of working out how we could do that and how we went about doing that. So over a period of a few months, summer holidays, basically, myself and a few others from the IT team kind of went away, kind of done a bit of research around that. And at that time, Microsoft had just started to kind of deploy these OpenAI tools that were available to different organizations. We had to actually contact Microsoft to get permission to use those tools at that time, and which I don't think is the case now. You can just kind of go in and sort of fire them up and kind of get started with them. And essentially what we were able to do was to deploy a private ChatGPT deployment based in the UK, sat alongside all of our kind of existing infrastructure, if you will, that was branded to the organization. It wasn't, or it isn't, a highly bespoke custom tool that there's only one person in the organization that knows how it works. We're really clear that we didn't want to introduce kind of like bit risk to the business, if you will. So this is all kind of just like, off the shelf tools that we've just kind of tailored to us. And we decided to, what's the word, amorphize it, or whatever, mispronounce that, but give it a human name, if you will. So we chose Winnie for Windsor Forest. To make it more accessible and a bit easier to talk about, rather than say, large language model based in the UK. And essentially, Winnie has access to our policies, information about the organisation. Essentially, got a big data store, if you will, that means that the responses it gives to staff are secure. They're based in the UK, and they're informed by knowledge of Windsor Forest. What that's allowed us to do, from a technology perspective, is a phrase that we like, which is kind of democratize technology across the organization and democratize AI across the organization. So kind of rather than go down that path where we could, we purchase like Copilot or Gemini licenses just for the few staff that we can afford to do that for, and then that, that technology gap grows bigger, if you will, we were able to deploy an AI tool that could be used by all staff across the organization, and at incredibly low costs as well for us.
I was going to say it's that focus on privacy. We knew that our vanguard would be experimenting, and we wanted to make sure that they had a safe place to interact with student data. We wanted to encourage innovation, but discourage any data leak. And also that democratization point, the cost you mentioned, Richard, of trying to get licenses in. How do you pick the people? It's all very well having a nimble license that you can move around to different people, but it's still, typically speaking, would have confined it to certain areas, to your existing champions who might not have the time now to investigate this.
We want it all using AI, but we're only paying for you guys.
Yeah, and leaving student services out, and actually perhaps not even teaching people the underpinning skills. If you're using a wrapper, if you've got something that was is wonderfully front-ended to help people, but doesn't fundamentally teach them how to prompt or to analyze what's going into the model to check what they're getting out, then you're losing them, and you've broken the education step. So I mean, everyone hit that same crossroads, and I mean, people have moods on calling something a name, anthropomorphizing an AI model, but we called it Winnie. I mean, I remember when Dan said Winnie, and it got sort of mute response.
Really? Sorry, Dan,
loved
I can't do that for you.
Clever, it's enough, yeah. But the reason I think it really helped us, and this I was only thinking about the other day, is that when people had heard negative things in the news about AI, when they'd read scary headlines about ChatGPT, this was something new that at least even just the name gave a sense of care. It's that care point again of we've gone through this. We've made sure it's got an abuse monitor, a content filter. It goes through our own internal systems. It's built inside our Azure framework. We know how it works. It just gave people a bit of reassurance to get started. And then, that leadership point, education and teamwork are the three strands of this, from the leadership being strong and saying, let's go for it, the sort of tech confidence, to educating ourselves about how it works, because as I said, there's no experts, and then working together as a team to share the best practice. And I shared a cheat sheet to start with. Dan did an equivalent for the admin teams. I did one for teachers, just 10 prompts to get you started, not long-winded 14-page numbers that felt like you need a PhD in prompt engineering to use. But actually, no one looks at that anymore, because you've only got to use it once and then you're in. So that's sort of how we got going. And then the cost you mentioned, I mean, that was the other big hook. It was, I think, the first couple of months, 10,000 conversations in February 2024 cost £136, which is excellent. And yes, it's slightly more now because we've connected to a different model. I think it's now somewhere around £8 a day.
Yeah, about £280 a month at the moment, because we've got image generation in there as well now, which we didn't have previously, but voice chat as well. Not many people use that at the moment, but that's in there too. And it's all kind of based and modeled on consumption as well. So we only really pay for what we use as an organization, which is a much more favorable place to be in terms of, allocating licenses that may or may not be used or may not be used in their completeness, which is... from a college group perspective, that's a much more comfortable base for us. We share the same challenges that a lot of other colleges, schools, and other organisations do around. We've got a large IT estate that that is in desperate need of upgrades over the next few years. We've got increasing software costs. So being able to do something that is incredibly impactful at a relatively low cost for the organisation has been a huge win for us. Yeah.
So is it the same thing, more or less, that EasyJet are running in their own organisation?
I don't know, actually. We never actually found out. I need to ask that question. The technologies that they're using, we took the concept, we took the idea, and then we had to kind of find out how to use it or how to do it ourselves, really. And I think it was just kind of fortuitous, really. At that time that we'd had that conversation, we kind of went away and done that kind of initial bit of research that Microsoft were just kind of promoting those those Azure AI tools, AI Foundry as it's called now. So in terms of kind of getting set up, and to kind of partly answer Harry's question there in the chat as well, is there are these already these kind of AI deployments that are tuned and available to use. We don't, as Roddy said, we don't have any kind of like AI experts or data scientists in house or anything like that. But what we've been able to do is using prompts is just kind of layer on top of those models, starting very simply saying, you are an AI assistant that works for the Windsor Forest Colleges Group, right through to these, rather complicated, long-winding descriptions of different functions that it performs in the organization that have kind of grown over time. And what's wonderful about it as a technology is how accessible it is. Any of us can have a conversation, hold a conversation, and you're just kind of doing that same thing with AI essentially, and you're just kind of gauging how it responds back to you.
And early doors, we were sort of a victim of our own enthusiasm, because anywhere we went, people were like, "Oh, can we buy it?" It's like, "Oh no, sorry, we're not selling this. We're selling the idea, but not with, there's not something from us that you can take." It took a fair bit of technical nous, on the Dan and the Tim and the team, really making, Paul making sure that everything was safe and done correctly, because it was new. There was no guide. There wasn't a sort of manual to follow. There were a few Reddit forums, but there wasn't a map to follow. There wasn't a guidebook. And so early doors, that AI, Azure AI Studio, it was quite a hostile environment to a non-coder. I looked at it, was like, sorry, there's 4,000 parameters, and trying to work out what the difference was between temperature and top K, and then they added top P, and actually from all the literature I read, no one knew the difference. And it was trying to understand something that was new, and I'm a bit of a jargon hater. I try and debunk and demystify things by translating into things that people understand, words that people understand, but it was quite scary to start with. Whereas now, as Dan mentioned, with things like Copilot Studio, with AI Foundry, with Azure Foundry, with Google AI Studio, you can get an instance going a lot quicker and more in a more user-friendly way. But I suppose we had that extra year of the benefit of private access to something. Dan sometimes calls it enterprise, that we had our own ability to explore and play in a safe space, but we weren't selling it. It was very much a give it a go and get under the hood and see what we can create.
And I know that we're not having a particularly technical call today, and you didn't bring in some of the IT folks, and that's more than fine, because we're talking more about leadership today. But in essence, then, just to come to Harry's question a little bit, is it more of a user experience module doing API calls, your integration calls into the back end of these models? Is that what you have, or have you got more of your own private large language model that's proprietary within your organization? Have you built your own ChatGPT, or are you going into it through the back end?
It's API calls essentially. Right. Microsoft have these OpenAI deployments in different regions across the UK and across Europe. And then I always look at it kind of like shared web hosting, and that's kind of how we approached it. In the you might all be sitting on the kind of on the same server, if you will, but there's a very neat secure line and wall between you all, and so we're pretty confident, having followed that Microsoft guidance and subsequently having conversations with them, that our data is very safe and secure, and because it is kind of based in that sort of Azure framework as well, it's been familiar territory for our IT team. I think had it been outside of that, we might still be pondering kind of, whether we're going to kind of go ahead with it. But because we're already kind of, deploying web applications through Azure, and it was familiar, although different, and that kind of gave us some confidence in terms of, coming back to that press and go, really.
And I think about applications like Teachermatic that I haven't used extensively, and it doesn't matter if I'm wrong here because it's the concept, but the idea is that you would put in your requests and their UX would deliver an API call that would say, here's your thing, versus ChatGPT, where it's much more of a back and forth, isn't it? Actually, can you reformat that? Could you bring this part out more, these kind of things? So which one have you got more of? Again, can they go back and chat back and forth?
Or is it more? Yeah, 100%.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And people do have long conversations. I mean, I do have long conversations with it. Only this morning, the example I gave you at the start of our conversation around, interrogating that spreadsheet, that big document of IT assets for the organisation. There was that was a long back and forth between me and Winnie, if you will, for lack of a better description. Can you give me an analysis on which departments have the oldest laptops, and which ones need replacing first, and all this sort of information. In that sense, it's been a really wonderful thing from a perspective of a lot of our staff are using it for marking moderation now. So be able to have conversations with student work, for example, has been a big win. We're seeing a lot of usage around that, and I think that's kind of how it's mostly used as well. When we kind of reflect on as an organisation what the impact has been, a lot of people use it as almost like a sounding board, if you will. So it's helped me reframe this email. How can I make this email more formal? How can I make it less formal? How do I get this point across without sounding angry? It's almost like that kind of that sounding board. So which is still fantastic because it saves us again a huge amount of time. Many of us, I definitely do. We'll pull an email up on my screen. You're going to look at it for ages, thinking, "Have I worded this correctly? How could I rephrase this before I send it?" Whereas actually having the AI there to help you with that, offer those different perspectives, it can save a huge amount of time in that sense.
And I've even heard colleagues who have been frustrated with it not giving an answer that they wanted, saying, but actually that itself was helpful because it made me challenge. Why did I not like that? Why is that wrong? Okay, I'll just write it myself. But they've got started. They're not staring at a blinking cursor. They've not got a blank page. And there's so many different ways in which, a brilliant example of a maths teacher linking ratios between different departments, between construction, where you can do ratios with cement, with the exact ratio that you're gonna create that, versus equine and the horse feed. Just that as an idea, suddenly go, the possibilities open up. That light bulb moment I had of I'd been to see Godzilla Kong, the New Empire in 2024. I saw a preview of it. It had only been out 5 minutes, but I wanted to use it as a source the next day because I wasn't looking forward to a Daphne du Maurier text with a woman winsomely walking down a coastal path with a parasol. I thought my level 2 plumbers aren't going to go for that. And actually, I managed to get it to write a text that matched the AQA spec, and played the trailer the next morning. Not only had they seen the film, most of them, were excited by it, but then I had a text that they were interested in looking at. Now, granted, in the exam, they won't have that, but it's at least a way in. And the fact that you can use it to relate to people and to make connections, if we look at all of those different use cases, a lot of them, as Dan say, clusters around communication. It's about helping people crunch information and put it across, and that's really the business of teaching is putting across ideas and wanting people to invest in them and engage in them and want to learn themselves. And if they're hearing it in a way that they can digest, you're already halfway there.
Well, I mean, just look at YouTube. Those videos that get hundreds of thousands or millions of hits. It's because ultimately the communication style is very good, and the visuals and the way it's put together and the way it works to people's attention spans. They've spent the time to reflect on that. So just taking a half step back. So ChatGPT as standard is not GDPR compliant, and that's a big deal for colleges. It's not to say that we're going to be leaking IP data like Samsung did that's going to completely ruin our organizations, but we have a standing in the community of how we want to manage our environment and our data, and that's really important. So it's a fantastic next step, isn't it, to put a situation in place that does protect people. It strikes me, and I'd love to get some questions from the group just after this one I've asked you. Do you have the ability to look at how many users you have of Winnie, who they are, how many API calls they make? Not in terms of exactly what they are, so I'm sure that's private, but how many times they call the API, and then have the chance to go and see them every few weeks or so and go, hey, you know, you're one of the power users. Can you tell us what you're doing? Can you share what's working for you?
Yes, I think that's really kind of, when we talk about the kind of data privacy aspect as well, I think that's really key, is having that log from an IT administrative perspective. We kind of treat it almost like email. So you know, if in a worst case scenario we ever want to access one of those conversations to pull out information that maybe shouldn't have happened on there, I think that's absolutely key. So sorry, I'm kind of taking that down a different path, that question there, but
that's a good
yeah, I think that's absolutely essential. Is just like providing an email service to an organization, that it's monitored, and there's those kind of, as Roddy mentioned earlier, those content filters around that as well, because although we're kind of encouraging that kind of creativity and celebrating that use of AI, there are parameters to that which I think are very important as well. And I also think, coming back to your point as well, I think it's essential for an organization to provide tools for staff to use, because if you don't, they're going to go out and use, like you said, ChatGPT and other, DeepSeek and other tools to be more efficient. And now we're very fortunate now that as educational institutions, that even the standard free Copilot now is kind of secure to the organization. Similarly with Gemini as well, so you can kind of have those confident conversations, if you will, confident in that data kind of won't leak outside, and train that model. Whereas actually in 2023, when we kind of first set up Winnie, that those tools weren't available in that form. So I think there's an onus on, coming back to that concept of digital leaders in the organization, to provide that tool set to start off. And I think the worst thing an organization can do is ignore that, because you can almost guarantee, a bit like our students that are using it in class, if you don't get a handle on that, if you don't embrace it, people are going to do that. Why not? Why wouldn't you? It's there. You can't, you hear so many people say you can't put it back in the bag now. And I think that's true.
I think it absolutely is. And it's better to get ahead of that and get some control over that, rather than just have a disparate state of it's just going to be every possible scenario, isn't it, in the coming years across your workforce. Every possible way they could or couldn't be using it is going to happen. That's going to be a big cleanup, isn't it?
I was talking to a friend about this yesterday, actually, and it feels very much 2025. For me, the emphasis should be on modeling it with students. Last year, it felt like, guys, this could be really useful for you at work. It can help teachers save time. Now it's imperative that we show students how to use it, because it's all very well saying they need to be using it ethically, but if you haven't shown them how, they need a model. We're their teachers. We're trusted. We're in a position of trust, and actually we can guide them. I went to speak to some T-level business students, and I mentioned AI, and the furtive looks between them as they were like, how does grandpa know about our thing? It was it's the illicit, isn't it? It's the thing that the teacher doesn't know about, so we can get away with. I mentioned 48% of teachers used it in 2024. 86% of students, according to the DEC, used it.
Yeah,
so that's
double.
Yeah, and actually that number should be the other way around. That's idealistic of me, but really we should be leading that conversation and showing them. What I was saying to the friend yesterday is it's the same as mobile phones, saying, there's too much mobile phone use, we should ban mobile phones, the phone shouldn't be in the classroom, and then you see teachers on their phones. Lord Knight was talking about not wanting to ban phones in classrooms, because even in the House of Lords, when giving a speech, members are on their phones. So we've got to understand it ourselves, so that we can model how to do it. And I think very much for students, it's about us knowing how to use it in class, being transparent about it. I used AI not to mark this, but look, this is the feedback it gave after I'd marked it. I said, what do you think? And it's given you a worksheet, and have a conversation about it. You've got to be open about it.
I think so for sure. And I hope those conversations gone away now, but people might say to me, Richard, have you used AI to write this article? Well, obviously I used AI. I also used Microsoft Word and Grammarly and anything I can use, but I can assure you AI didn't write the article. I can assure you that. We've just got 12 minutes or so left. I see there's still quite a few of us here in the room, which is wonderful. I really do want to make sure I open up for any questions. Obviously, I've got another 500 questions I could ask you guys. There's just so much. But anybody want to pop their camera on or pop their microphone on or pop something in the chat? And just while you're doing that, I see Jackie's point. I think to what Lord Knight said as well, I think thinking about whether we ban phones in the classroom is fairly academic, because according to the tech giants, we're not that far away from phones being sort of secondary anyway to things like glasses or other mediums of information. The Ray-Ban Metas are already quite popular now. So, we're getting to the point where there'll be many, many ways for students to interact with data in the classroom, and it won't just be through a phone.
If you don't show students, you're disadvantaging them, is the other way to look at it. When we talk about mobile phones, talk about AI, they are commonplace. We certainly, I use it, for my role all throughout the day. I've got my phone next to me now, seeing my emails on there, using AI to send emails and stuff like that. It's if we don't, we are, it's the responsibility is on us to show students how to use these tools. And to Jackie's point in the chat there, it's the right tool for the right job. Absolutely agree with that.
If I'm correct, Jackie's from Molten College, and she's asking about sustainability, and it's a great point, because yes, we can all encourage use of these tools, but that will, I don't know what it would be, level, would it be B or C emissions or something like level 2 or 3, sorry, in terms of secondary emissions, but it would be accountable, I guess, to the college. Are you thinking about how to track that in the future and see the impact of that?
Yeah, yes, we are. Microsoft do give an indication of the sustainability impacts of those API calls that we're making, and I think that increasingly will become reflecting our choices of the models that we use, their impacts. We're very much kind of at the moment focused on I suppose the financial impacts of these tools across the organization, but I think increasingly, as the more and more models become available for us to use to tie into Winnie and to other tools that we use, the environmental impacts of those tools will really kind of factor into that decision making as well. I think there is an onus on the technology companies to be more transparent around that impact as well. So there's some indication on there, but we can't be absolutely certain.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult. If we broaden out the picture, yes, these technologies use a lot of energy. I mean, all technology does to some extent. And in the past, like gaming consoles and so on that have sat on standby the entire time, and TVs that have sat on standby, they've used a lot of secondary power across the years. We don't have the renewable energies in place. We're rapidly changing that in the UK, but in the US, it's going in the opposite direction. They're looking at fossil fuels to power these new data centers, which is understandable from an economic perspective, but inexcusable from a sustainability perspective, particularly the timing that we're in. But we also have to acknowledge that all technologies are going to use more power. And there's some crypto mining that's been a huge waste of power, but there's some blockchain platforms that have been essential and very useful. So I think, as people on the front foot, we know. Please.
Yes.
I'll give Roddy a second.
Right, it's in the...
His turn.
I'm just turning off my video in the interest of clinging on in case I can get a message out. The lag is a bit like 90s satellite calls, isn't it? Where Eurovision results would come in staggered.
Well, you can just admit you're in Bali if you want. We won't tell you. You've been doing your job remotely for the last 6 months. Okay.
Dan might have something to say about that. But the biggest energy use is in the training, right? So ChatGPT 3 cost 170,000 to train. GPT-4 cost 8 million. That went up. But then DeepSeek claims they got that down 50 to 75%. And when you can run a local instance on a computer, it shows that I'm optimistic that actually that energy use will come down. And as we look at the way in which AI could even help with fusion energy research, it's helping optimize plasma configurations and predict its behavior. We could actually help solve some of those energy problems with AI. So yeah, I think that can be a bit of a blind alley, and there's a lot of different numbers out there, and people get very confused with kilowatt hours.
I think on the top of our wish list, there's a great feature on. We're big Google Docs fans at Windsor Forest. We love Google Classroom and that ecosystem. And on the Google admin panel, there's a fantastic interface that shows the environmental impacts of your Google Drive storage and Google Classroom usage, and that kind of stuff is really interesting. And having that transparency around the tools so that you can kind of reflect on your usage as an organization, I think is very important. So yeah, kind of come back to that point. I think there is an onus on the technology providers, to be more transparent around what that consumption costs, essentially.
I think interesting. Yeah, and I'd love to see that everywhere, Dan. And when you're on Netflix or Amazon Prime and you're going to stream a movie and it says, do you want it in Ultra HD or 4K? It should say this will be the energy impact of you choosing these particular outcomes. People might go, actually, it doesn't matter to me, does it? I don't need the extra bit of clarity for the cost of the environment. I choose not to.
Otherwise, the only time you ever see that information is when booking a train, and it tells you how much better it is than a plane. But I like seeing those numbers. So you're right that we should put more. The reason people have low data literacy, but some of that is lack of data. If you put it in front of people, they will start to develop their own understanding of what it means. So yeah, I agree. That's a good idea.
And people got pretty angry at crypto, but not to be too technical here, but when a lot of the platforms moved from proof of work to proof of stake, in fact, there was one platform that said they'd got their cost of transactions down for cryptocurrency to the same cost as a Visa transaction in terms of the environmental impact. So, make sure you read the full stories there, I guess. We've got 5 minutes. Let's get through as many questions as we can. Andrew says, are you using it with students at all? Well, I suppose this is the question, have students got access to Winnie?
Not Winnie. So what we do at the moment is we use Gemini with students. As Roddy kind of mentioned earlier, the staff kind of model AI in class. So this is how we use it. This is how you can use it. And kind of there's been some really lovely examples of activities where teachers have kind of demonstrated at the front of the classroom and students have used it. We have started on a version of Winnie for students called Willow, and we've kind of paused on that for the moment, but we are going to come back to it. And one of the reasons we're going to come back to it is very much from a safeguarding perspective, is having that access to the information that is shared with that model, having that, as I kind of gave that example of like email earlier, having that database if you need it of those conversations that have happened. But also, I think what's very important is confidence in its response as well. So, if you ask Gemini or Copilot, questions around safeguarding or concerns around safeguarding, for instance, in an educational context, you get a great response, but it's not the organizational response. And I think that's very important is, until those tools that those organizations make available to students allow you to tailor some of those responses, again, there's an onus on us to supply a tool that can. So I tried to give that an answer as quick as possible there.
And that thing Dan mentioned about the great classroom practice. I mean, Juliana and her ESOL group, they were sharing prompts that they'd found were successful in a Google Doc. So they were all working together on them. And one of the great finds from that I've mentioned a few times is they've spotted the difference between list my errors and correct my work. If you just get it to correct it, it regurgitates it and you lose your style. Whereas actually, if you say list my errors, they've got a worksheet. And these are students for whom English isn't their first language. And many of them are hungry to get on. I mean, one of our students, Leticia, used it to get onto her level 2 business course by using it to practice as a conversational partner. I mean, incredible use of it. And she was a pioneer in that group of going, have you tried using it for this? She's built lessons for her fellow students to help them pass GCSE maths because she shows how she used it to revise and get it to show it's working. So I think there's a lot of sharing. And I think it's about bringing down those fences, and not just between staff and student, but between students. There's a lot of students who I believe aren't talking to each other about using it. That 86 number I gave suggests that, that all the conversation in the student common room is about AI, but actually a little bit like gaming in the 90s. It's something that people do quietly at home and don't talk about because they don't want to confess it's because we're saying it's something that we haven't modeled and it looks suddenly illicit, then they think they can't use it. Therefore, they'll do it quietly on their own, but we need to help show them how to use it by bringing down those barriers.
Yes, absolutely. That's critical. Thank you, Roddy. We have 90 seconds if anybody else has a critical question they want to get in. I'm sure that we can follow up after the session if these things come up afterwards. So
whilst anyone's pondering, I'm enjoying that Fireflies has given us a list of meeting actions, which is essentially a lot of things to do for me. I've got to create some, ensure staff understand how to use the tools, create a cheat sheet, create an equivalent sheet, model the use of AI. So I've got a busy 2025.
A big one for me there at the end, I've got to lead the conversation and AI usage in the classroom and demonstrate its application. So I'll get cracking on that one.
But that does actually illustrate another great thing I've advocated people doing when they're demonstrating it, modeling it with students in class, is proving it's fallible. I think if we don't show that it can make mistakes, then it is more likely that students will copy paste and think, well, that's job done. I heard a lawyer yesterday saying that she'd had one of her trainees do the same thing and they hadn't even read it back. We have to show that. We have to model it because
it gets better and better. Fireflies at first, it would capture up the actions and the summary. So it would say things at the start like, Richard asked Roddy how his weekend was. Roddy replied, good. And it's like, okay, good. And then my favorite one ever was Spotify. Back in the day, the algorithms were not as sophisticated as they were. And I remember searching for the song Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers and playing that. And then Spotify recommended other songs with the word bridge in the title, on the assumption that my interest was primarily in songs about bridges. So we've come a long way. Gentlemen, that's it. Doesn't the hour go quickly? Thank you so much. And Alex, too, for helping to organize this. Roddy, Dan, it's been tremendous to talk to you about this and hopefully really beneficial. We'll have a look at the numbers in the next few days around YouTube and LinkedIn, see how many people that we've reached. We'll record this. Let's get it out on the podcast, everything. Let's spread this message far and wide. I'm so proud of you both for your leadership and so appreciative of what you're doing within the college and also stepping out to give us the time, your precious time, to talk about how you are achieving these things and so that we can learn and be inspired by your leadership. And thanks to Gillian as well for allowing this to be possible today. Gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We'll keep talking.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thanks again, and we'll stop the session now.
Cheers.
Bye.
Recording stopped.
Here we go.